3 years since the Ukraine war began, Russia and Vladimir Putin seem to be in the driver's seat. Moscow has now claimed that Ukraine's eastern Luhansk region has been entirely conquered, making it one of the first of 4 eastern Ukrainian regions that Russia has annexed fully. What happens next in the war? President Trump wants to end all wars, including this one, but will he be able to do that? He's not met with much success, certainly not in the last 3 or 4 months that he's been president. Or is Vladimir Putin taking Donald Trump for a royal ride? I dive a little deeper. Russia pounded Ukraine over the weekend with hundreds of drones and missiles. The Ukrainian authorities confirmed this to be one of the largest assaults since this war began more than 3 years ago. Strikes on Ukrainian infrastructure were reported across the length and breadth of the country, including, in quite a rare instance, in western Ukraine, where Russia has hit much less frequently in these last 3+ years. The attack was the latest in a series of escalating Russian air assaults, with Moscow repeatedly setting new benchmarks for the number of weapons that were used. The Ukrainian Air Force said that Russia had launched more than 500 drones and missiles overnight. That is the highest number that's been recorded in a single night so far. The figure includes non-lethal decoy drones, which are designed to confuse Ukrainian air defenses. Russia has begun using on a mass scale these decoy drones just in the last 1 year in order to try and disable Ukraine's air defenses. Ukraine's military is forced to use its limited stockpile of air defense missiles to counter Russia's large swarms of drones. Now, military experts say that these are aimed at overwhelming Ukraine's air defense units, which are stationed on the ground. The air defense missiles are the only weapons that are capable of shooting down some of these incoming missiles and drones. Ukraine's Air Force has also said that about 90% of the Russian drones were intercepted, they were disabled by electronic jamming, or simply crashed without causing any damage because they happened to be decoys and they did not have any explosive material on them. But the Ukrainian Air Force reported the death of a pilot who crashed his American-designed F-16 jet as he was trying to repel the Russian assault. Ukraine uses fighter jets to shoot down incoming missiles because there's a lack of enough ground-based air defense systems. One of the rare instances of this F-16 being downed in the conflict since this war began. The Air Force of Ukraine has said that this particular pilot who was riding this F-16, he had shot down 7 aerial targets, but he went down with his jet after it was damaged in the attack. A report released last month by the Center for Strategic International Studies, which is an American think tank, said that Russia has significantly ramped up its use of drones, particularly in the last year. They have increased from approximately 200 drones launched per week on average to more than 1,000 per week by the end of March this year. Given the current pace of attacks, Russia may exceed 5,000 drone launches in the month of June alone, which would be a record for the conflict. Ukrainian leader Zelensky has also been lobbying with President Donald Trump of the US to try and let Ukraine purchase American-designed Patriot air defense systems. The Patriots are really the only ones that are reliably capable of shooting down Russian ballistic missiles. Trump, while he was at the NATO summit last week, refused to meet Zelensky separately, but he did suggest that he was open to sending more Patriots to Ukraine, although it was unclear whether he meant the batteries that propel the air defense systems or whether he was going to give just the ammunition while leaving the surface equipment untouched. He also did not clarify whether he wanted to donate these to Ukraine or whether Ukraine would have to spend money and purchase these from the United States. Russia's summer offensive is gaining ground significantly in eastern Ukraine. This was launched back in May. It's now showing tremendous battlefield gains, and this is across multiple fronts. The playbook is to use probing and attacking tactics with small, fast-moving units as the fighting escalates every single day. With its advances, Russia has now shifted the advantage on the battlefield. In May, Russia seized nearly 170 square miles. That was more than double of what it gained in April. This data has been released by Deep State, which is a Ukrainian group which maps the conflict using footage of the combat. In the month of June, that figure of how much territory Russia has managed to capture is expected to be in the range of 200 square miles. That is one of the highest monthly gains. Most of these gains have come south of Konstantinivka, which is in the Donetsk region. It's close to the Russian border in the northern Sumy region as well. These are the two predominant areas where Russia is making deep advances and at a rapid pace. Both sides have also now turned to new tactics. They're using motorcycles, they're using civilian cars to quickly cross open terrain. Ukraine, which relies heavily on drones to hold its positions, is also using civilian vehicles to resupply its defensive lines. Russia, on the other hand, is using these civilian vehicles, motorbikes and cars in frontline assaults. The fighting is intensifying even as the ceasefire talks brokered by the United States have mostly collapsed. In recent months, Russian troops have captured at least a dozen villages in Sumy. The advance there is tiny, but it's in very frequent steps and combined with small assault groups, often just 2 or 3 Russian soldiers, who probe Ukrainian positions in waves. The city of Sumy is home to about 200,000 civilians, including many who've been displaced from the fighting along the border. The city of Sumy is now under growing threat as Russia advances. Russian forces overran Sumy in the initial invasion in early 2022, but then Ukraine managed to recapture it later that year. Konstantinivka, which is a Ukrainian operations hub, will likely become the next main effort for Russia in the coming months. The first step is to try and isolate the city from multiple directions in what they call a semi-encirclement. In some areas close to Konstantinivka, Russia has the manpower advantage against Ukraine, sometimes up to 20 men as against 1 Ukrainian soldier. At the same time, frontline airstrikes have also intensified, even after Ukraine destroyed at least a dozen Russian strategic bombers as part of that stealth operation it carried out in May. At the start of May, Russia was carrying out about a little less than a dozen airstrikes a day. That has now picked pace to about 17 in a day in the month of June. So throughout the Donbass, parts of Donetsk and Luhansk regions, Russia has concentrated its drone units and is targeting roads, particularly threatening supply lines for Ukrainian defensive units. Russia claims to have captured large parts of Luhansk, which is the second biggest part of the Donbass region. Analysts say the Russian advances in Donbass follow a systemic pattern. The troops first isolate Ukrainian positions, they target the logistics and defense supply lines and reinforcements with drones, then they pound them with artillery and aerial assaults, and then repeat that cycle further deep down the line. So far, it seems to be working well for Russia. So much so, many are saying that the summer of 2025 is proving to be Putin's second wind. All right, so how is this expected to play out? I want to go across to Daniel Fried. He's a veteran American diplomat. He's been ambassador in Russia, has been tracking the Russia-Ukraine war since it started. Thanks very much, Ambassador. So 3 years since this Ukraine war began, Russia seems to be developing some kind of edge on the battleground. At least that's what the claim is from the Kremlin. They say that they've conquered all of Luhansk. They're also really closing in on the northern city of Sumy. How do you see the battlefield advantage, or at least the battlefield momentum, shifting on the ground? Do you think the Russians have the battlefield momentum now, particularly in the last month and a half or so?
The Russians are advancing on the ground, but neither decisively nor quickly. We've seen this before. The Russians often announce big offensives. They gain some ground, but the Ukrainian lines have never broken. The Russian gains are slight, at least so far, and Russian casualties are very high. Now, this time it could be different. There's always a chance the Russians will break through, but so far they have not done so. And their advances on the ground are coming at great costs. Remember, Russia is a much larger, much more populous country than Ukraine. The Ukrainians have held them off for over 3 years. The Russians are making gains sort of on a World War I level, very slowly and at very high cost, at least for now. The Russians are also involved in basically terror bombing of Ukrainian cities, targeting and killing civilians, hoping to demoralize the Ukrainians. And we know that this kind of tactic actually doesn't work very well. Okay. So the Russians claim victory in the war, but they have made this claim many times before. We'll see. So far, skepticism seems the proper reaction.
But Ambassador, as much as President Donald Trump would want to have a ceasefire between Russia and Ukraine. That ceasefire has been very elusive. In fact, would it be fair to say that the talks, whatever happened, I think a month and a half ago, there were the last set of talks that happened between Russia and Ukraine, of course, brokered by the United States. Those talks have pretty much stalled. We are not seeing any of these parties talking about, the next round of talks. So the question then is, can the United States broker a truce between Russia and Ukraine? And is it fair to say that President Putin of Russia has been using this stalled phase, this last month and a half, the summer offensive, as it were, using the stalled phase in the talks to have battlefield advances on the ground?
Well, it's certainly fair to say that the Russians so far have not been serious about the talks. They've put on the table maximalist demands, which include a demand that Ukraine withdraw from areas that Russia claims but has not managed to conquer. The Russians are demanding basically Ukrainian surrender, something they have not yet won on the battlefield. So the Russians are not serious at all. The question is, first, are there any talks going on privately between the U.S. and the Russians? This is possible. There may be a back channel in motion. And whenever there is silence, I wonder publicly, which there sort of has been about the talks, I wonder whether something is going on. But so far, at least according to what is publicly known, the Russians are not serious about negotiations, but the Ukrainians are. The Ukrainians have agreed to a ceasefire in place without conditions. The Russians have not. Trump has said that he wants a ceasefire without conditions, but he has not yet taken steps to push Russia into accepting the ceasefire the way he earlier took steps against Ukraine. So the Russians are simply folding their arms and waiting for the Ukrainians to cave and for the Americans to give up. We'll see what Trump does. But so far, there is nothing serious in the talks.
All right. Ambassador Daniel Fried, former U.S. ambassador, thank you very much for joining us here on CNN News 18. Thank you.